landed in town. Rumor that there's a possibility of establishing an airfield there, which would have been here, about a mile north of Bethany Center. They landed in the farmer's field. And somebody said, gee, that would be a good place for an airport. That impromptu landing doesn't record exactly what happened. It was a mishap, or they intended to got the attention of Harris Whittemore here of Naugatuck. He was an entrepreneur, very active in Naugatuck, and he bought in 1922, so 2 years after that landing, he bought 48 acres. Before this was an airfield, this was the George Woodward farm. So it was just pastures and tilled fields and so forth, cows grazing. And one of his homes stands just north here, the house that's just on the other side of the hangar. And over time, Whittemore increased his holding to over 400 acres. This is the property map. It's going to examine this is that circle I'm talking about. The hangar is here. This is Munson Road, Hammond Road. He amassed over 400 acres, stretching west all the way to Old Fairwood, north to the Bethany Bog, south all the way down to the state police barracks, and west, including the whole area of Sergeant Drive, was all airport property. And one of the things here, you see out here, is they actually moved, this is the utility line, since they own all this land, they moved the power lines away from the airport so it wouldn't interfere with landings. Land was sold off over the time for commercial and residential development. When the town purchased it in 1967, only about 100 acres remained. Today we actually have 140. There were some subdivision donations as well as land purchases, so we have 140 acres now. The new airfield had a 1,500-foot north-south runway and a 1,400-foot approximately east-west runway, which is kind of, you see the ghost of that here. It has not been used, but that's why that's clearing where the old recycling center was. So by October 1923, Bethany Field was open for business. Several aviation pioneers, including John Nixon, Bert Acosta, and Gus Graff, were connected to this airport. John Nixon built a lightweight airplane at home from wood, wire, and known as the Nixon Special. This is him in his backyard building a plane. So they did very experimental. This actually still exists. It's at the New England Air Museum today. It's the only one we know of that still exists from the 1920s era of the airport. Whittemore and Nixon together formed the B line of Naugatuck, which was later renamed Colonial Airlines. They jumped on the popularity of barnstorming, entertaining spectators with stunt flying, wing walking, parachuting, airplane rides. This was thrilling to watch, but it wasn't enough to sustain the airfield. Fortunately, Colonial caught the attention of the U.S. government for airmail. Aviation was so new. They received the first federal airmail contract for the Boston to New York City run. And the Nixon Special was one of the planes that was used for this. Another person I mentioned was Gus Graff. This is some newspaper articles. He decided one day to take off from Bethany and fly to Florida, which he did. And he made a nonstop flight in 1929 to Florida, which was quite a distance. He ran into a little difficulty over Washington, D.C., because apparently he flew over an Army anti-aircraft practice and had to dodge exploding shells. So he quickly changed course to avoid the area. And then the last one we talked about was another colorful individual connected with this airport was Bert Acosta. He was an extremely gifted aviator, but had a bad boy reputation. On the one hand, he was a cadet pilot for the Army during World War I, set the airspeed record of 174 miles per hour in 1921, flew the Atlantic only 1 month after Lindbergh, and broke the flight endurance record by staying aloft 51 hours, 11 minutes, and 20 seconds. On the other hand, he had several run-ins with the law. Eventually ended up losing his pilot's license. In 1928, which is what this article is about, there's a picture of Mr. Acosta. He spent 5 days in jail for reckless flying. He was witnessed with wild flying over Naugatuck, and police were called. He actually, in the middle of it, he stopped here at the Bethany field to refuel, and then he went back to do more daredevil stunts over Waterbury. After he was done with that, he flew back here and stopped at the Airdrome Inn. This is, which was here, which I believe was just north of the house that's next door. It was on airport property. And I may have had a few beverages, and that's where he was arrested by police. Next one. So then this is actually hangar number 2. The diorama over there shows the hangar number 1 you can look at after. But it gave, the age of discovery for aviation gave way to more commercial and recreational pursuits. This is very distinctive. The hangar was painted with massive letters, Bethany. We'll talk about that in a second. And for easy identification in the air. It was much larger and offered charters, instructions, and repair. Several businesses sprang up nearby, the aforementioned Airdrome Inn, the Dewdrop Inn, Airport Service Station, and the Airport Diner. In World War II, brought some changes. There was a temporary closure at the outbreak of the war where the U.S. was involved. It closed civilian traffic 50 miles from the shore, which would include here. Also, 150 miles from the shore, they had to erase any air markings. So enemy aircraft, very worried about that. Aside, like my father remembered as a little kid, this is the same time they painted over the top of the headlights. So they wouldn't reflect up. So it was a very serious concern at the time. So that had to go. Unfortunately, that caused an unintended consequence. In January 1942, they were painting over that lettering. Tar was heated on a stove inside the hangar, which didn't work out well and caught fire and rapidly spread throughout the building. Spectators rushed to move the planes to safety. The gasoline from the planes didn't help matters, obviously. And it burned to the ground and collapsed in about 20 minutes. 6 planes were destroyed, and almost more tragically, all the airport records up to that time were lost. But no one was hurt, and 16 planes were actually saved by people grabbing them and pushing them out, which is pretty amazing. There's an article about the loss. It was a setback for the airport, but it opened in the spring of 1942 under Walter Reynolds, who was a pilot, military pilot. He introduced the Civil Air Patrol here to conduct training and patrol over New England, again during World War II, and also continued into the 50s in the Cold War. There was a greatest expansion of the facilities, multiple hangars. This is kind of the base of the hangar that burned, and around that they built all these other hangars. There's the Aero that we'll see later. This is the house next door. There's the airport diner. In addition to that, they also built a 290-foot long hangar at the south end of the field, basically where the soccer fields are now for CFC. At that, they painted this massive sign on it, on the roof, "Welcome to the USA, Bethany, Connecticut." It was known as the Air Statue of Liberty. It got some publicity. Unfortunately, this south hangar only stood in an intact basis for a few years, destroyed in a hurricane in 1950. And if you look at later photographs, you can see it's still here, the northern part, but the lower 2/3 are gone. They never rebuilt it. After the 40s, Mr. Whittemore stepped back from running the airport. He still owned the land, and after that, everyone was leasing it who ran it. And in 1954, Bob Jones took over the airport operations with his wife Ruth, and that's Mr. Jones here. This is a great picture. The one of the helicopters were a new thing. They made an exciting addition to air shows, kite flying contests. There's an article from 1954 where 2,500 people showed up here for a kite flying contest, which is probably the entire population of the town at the time. There were also fly-ins. Wealth included the fire department would put on a breakfast. There was stunt flying, glider maneuvers, and skydiving. The familiar Quonset hut that most people know was built in 1957. So the one that was this one here that was built after the fire was taken down, and in its place was put the familiar Quonset hut. The interesting thing about it is it's kind of synonymous with the old airport, the Quonset hut, and what we have today is a replica of it. However, it only actually housed planes for 8 years, which is kind of crazy. It's for 30 years it had town trucks, and then an additional 20 years it was cold storage for other town equipment. So 50 out of the 58 years it was not used for airport operations. Which is, when I'm kind of adding it up, you don't really think about it. But it was put to good use for airplane service, storage, and events. Another thing that they did here was aerial advertising. And their biplane was used to pull banners over large public gatherings, such as at the Yale Bowl. And banners had to be attached to the flight. So planes would take off and circle back and snag the sign, flying very low over the runway. We have, not here, but we have pictures of that. One plane would often drag a banner with a question, and another one would nearby pulling the answer. So one saying, "Who conquered living space?" The answer is Castro convertibles, of course. At halftime, planes would head back to Bethany to refuel, then pick up new banners and fly back to New Haven. In 1960, the airport appeared to have a bright future. Jones held a lease on the property until 1972. Unfortunately, tragedy struck that year. Bob Jones had just taken off in a new plane when he suddenly lost power at low altitude. He tried to turn back to land and crashed in the woods just south of the airport and was killed. His wife Ruth took over operations. This is Ruth in the airport office here. And with help from existing staff, tried to keep the airport going. Al Porto worked here and helped managing. Eventually, Ruth and Al married, and they ran the business together. But by the mid-1960s, the article here about politics seen pushing area airports into tailspin. It's a good headline. They were under pressure from the state, which at the time favored publicly owned regional airports as opposed to small, privately owned, and were actually actively subsidizing efforts to build the new field in Oxford at the time, which was going to be a big competition for here. But the main thing that contributed to the end of the airport was the Channel 8 television tower. Triangle Publications wanted to build a broadcast tower on Madmare Mountain on the Hampton-Bethany town line. The Portos opposed the project as a navigational hazard. And what's interesting is the elevation here is 680 feet above sea level. Madmare Mountain is 659. We're actually a little higher here than Madmare Mountain. The tower was 900 feet, so there'll be a total of 1,549 feet above sea level. Then kind of what happened behind the scenes, Triangle approached Beth Air Corporation, which is the company that owned the land at the time, and obtained an option on the property. And then Beth Air turned around and said, "We're not renewing the lease after 1972. And then the Portos, who already were under pressure, they saw the Oxford airport coming, and why would you invest any money in this when it's going to come to an end within a few years? So they made the difficult decision. They ended the lease 7 years early, and December 11th, 1965, the windsock was lowered to the ground for the last time, ending over 40 years of aviation that is my introduction. From here, we're going to do a little walk. Yeah, and then, well, actually, we don't have to move to the first one because we're talking about this building. So this is actually hangar number 6, or main hangar number 6, because there were additional ones, but there was always a main hangar with a big sign on it. And this is one from about 30 years ago, and even so, it wasn't looking so hot then. I remember that it was rusting, especially along the edges here, and because when the road crew was here, they, probably some people will remember, a solution, something they had plenty of, is asphalt. So they would put asphalt along both sides to, as it was rotting, to kind of patch it up a little bit. But that was definitely a Band-Aid solution. So it was in very poor condition, and so this was taken down in around 2015 when this new building was being constructed. All right, we're ready to start walking. So this is where we get to kind of a ghost of the airport, or a not a real ghost, but a just a clue. Where over there's nothing that remains of the airport diner. However, here's a picture from the late 50s, early 60s. That's the 1957 hangar, and there's what's Steve's Deli now. There was a fence that went along the road, a chain link fence, to kind of keep people off the field. But there was a jog in it where it went in and it included and encapsulated the airport diner. And it was just enough so people could pull in, straight in, off the road, be off the road to park and facing to watch planes take off and land, air shows. And this shows a map of it, this little jog here, which is here. This is the one. If you go down there, there's actually a little bit of the chain link fence in one of the trees. And it went here, and it went here, and it went there to that tree. That tree is kind of the sole. There used to be a whole line of trees there. That's the sole survivor. That shows where this little, and this would have gone up and then jogged back in right at the corner where the airport diner was. So it's just kind of a little ghost of what was once here. And then you're always when you drive by, you're always going to be thinking that now. That you just looked at it and why did they put these trees out not in a line? That's the reason, is they had this parking area to observe the airplanes. All right, so go to the next one. Okay, so from here we're gonna walk to the center of the field here, and we're gonna try our best to find this circle, because this is about 1950. This picture's taken. This was 2023. It's still there. We look at the 1934 aerial. There was a flyover the state in 1934, which is the earliest one where it's comprehensive for the whole state, and it's there too. It's faint, but it's there. Our theory is that it was the first airport marker for the center of the airport, and then it was later replaced by other ones. We have no idea how it was made, whether it was lime or something that survived for 90 or 100 years. So we'll try to see if we can find it. But like if you had a drone or something and went straight up, you'd be able to see it right away. But it's very clear, and it's almost right across, diagonally across from Steve's Deli. So we'll kind of go over to that. It's honestly hard to tell, but I believe I'm standing in the middle of it. There's a little trace of a circle all around. It's very hard to see, but you look at Google Maps, you get a drone. I never noticed it before until I started looking at the pictures, and I just never absorbed what the significance. And I thought it was, maybe some kids doing donuts or something, and but it's there. We know at least from 1934, and it would be an ideal spot right in the middle here to mark the middle of the runway. So we kind of want to explore at some point to try to probe a little bit, see what would it be made of where it would still exist 90 to 100 years later. Standing here, the The other, oh, I think we go up one. Is another shot of the airport. That shows that clearing here, which was the old recycling center. That was the east-west runway. We'll kind of walk by it. And there were runway markers along here, and we have one in the hangar there, and we're going to look at some of them after. I tried my best along there. I couldn't find any. I know they're there, but they rust, so they look the same as the rest of the brush and so forth. But that there were markers along there showing the edge of the runway. And then this, as we're right across from it, this is a cool picture, a cool shot of airport service station when it was run by Pop Anderson, and then it was Ivar's. Had gas pumps out in front. There were an unbelievable number of gas stations in Bethany at one time. When you add them all up, there was like 8 to 10 gas stations. But they sold, in addition to food and stuff, they sold Pittsburgh paints, as rakes and shovels and stuff out in front, kind of a little general store. Pretty cool. And this is from like the mid 50s. And obviously they got a lot of airport business. So from here we're going to go to the famous airport arrow, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay. So this is obviously the airport arrow, and it points northeast to the Meriden Airport. In the old days, most pilots, they didn't have the instrumentation that we have today. They relied on highways, landmarks, and aerial signs to navigate. I remember hearing Ellie Downs, a pilot that flew out of here, talking about that he'd have road maps in his plane. And I'd be flying down over 95. What exit is that? I got to take a right so I can go to Bethany. That's how they did it. It was definitely very primitive. But this arrow it's on the old pictures. You can see here, this is the 1934. It shows the arrow. But it kind of got forgotten about. Probably if people had noticed it, they assumed it was gone. This was covered up with grass. People were driving over it, parking on it, horse shows, for years. It was kind of forgotten about. When they're doing the hangar project, it was rediscovered and uncovered. And then more recently, Les has spearheaded to build the fence here, the drainage, clear it. It requires maintenance because it's cracked. And there was someone looked at it and said, "Why don't you could just break it all up and just make a new one?" It's like, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. It's broken, but this is one of the few physical pieces. We're looking at little clues and where this used to be. This is here. We have to keep it, maintain it as best we can. It was constructed in the summer of 1927, and a vital link in the New York to Boston airmail route via Hartford. There's a designated arrow E9 here on the map. And you'll notice it doesn't go exactly, it's not an exact straight, it's got a little jog to it. It was the 9th of 14 directional arrows on the route from New York to Hartford. And this is from Les. The curved arrow directed planes from the 38th degree New York azimuth to the 11th degree Hartford directions. That's a great word.
This was their turning point. They would come up from New York to Boston by way of Hartford. So this was E9. There were 14 of these concrete arrows between New York and Hartford. And the planes would on this azimuth, and from here they would bank to the left, and this would point them directly towards Hartford. And they'd pick up 5 more on the way.
We're just taking pictures. Linda said take pictures.
Are any more of these arrows left in Philadelphia?
Are there other ones in Connecticut?
There's one over in Trumbull, which they've tried to keep a secret because a lot of people are coming and destroying it. And then there was another one over in, I forget forget exactly where, but there's one or two of them left. Yes,
Out west, there's a lot more, right?
these run all across the country. There were various airmail routes. These arrows appeared from California to Texas, Midwest, and all up and down the East Coast. Out in Texas a couple of years ago, I visited a couple of them, Texas and Oklahoma, and took some pictures of some of them. And some of them had the big towers, so that they were lit up at night so that the airmail pilots could see them at night. It was originally flown by Army Air Force pilots, and that was taken over by Colonial Airlines for several years, and then that became American Airlines. So you could say American Airlines started right here in Bethany.
And then we're saying before, this is about 2015, 2016 when they were discovered or rediscovered. This is kind of covered by grass, uncovering it, and then here, and then this is the efforts. It was a team effort, a lot of spearheaded by Les. The Public Works did the drainage around here. Ladecrete donated the paint here to bring it back to what it would look like. I mean, because there wasn't any trace of the paint left, right?
No,
It all worn away.
well,
But
it was poured, this and many other like it were poured in the summer of 1927. So I'm really kind of surprised that this much has lasted since then with all the fine use that it has gotten.
and obviously this we had a very good question here about the fence. This isn't something that would have been here in the middle of it, but it was put up to protect it, keep people from driving over it, to highlight it. But it seemed like the best way to protect this is to enclose it with a fence.
And we're going to put up a plaque, a stone and a plaque to memorialize it. And we started planning this about 3 or 4 years ago, but you can't rush into these things. So it'll get done one of these days. They don't call it the Historical Society for nothing.
Okay, we're ready to move on. So anyone has any questions for Les? Not me? Okay.
I plead insanity.
I'm stopping here. We're going to go a little further to where the markers are. Two things here. This property in here is privately owned, kind of where the wood line is. There's the one house there that was George Woodward House. There was a second house to the north of it, which I believe was where the Airdrome Inn was. It all belonged to the airport. They bought it from the Woodward family, so they used it for different functions. And then we have a picture here of the Dewdrop Inn, which is the site of Country Corner Diner, and it had a great sign on top. But what's interesting on this one, if you look at the roof, hot dogs, ice cream, sandwiches, that wasn't for people driving by. That was for your flying overhead. I could really use a hot dog. And you'd land here, you'd go over there, the ultimate in advertising. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go up to the corner and we're going to look for those triangular markers. And I've marked them with orange tape so we can see them better. We won't go into the woods, but we'll stand on the edge and maybe it'll be less windy. This was Lebanon Road. See the stone wall there? It went right from there all the way over to what's Fairwood Road. And when Whittemore bought the property, he bought the land on both sides, and he approached the town and said, "Would you abandon the road? I'll build you a new one north of here," which is where Fairwood comes into Amity now. So this was the town road. When we go back by the recycling center, we'll see the double stone walls and the trace of it. But the town did abandon this road. They built them a new one to the north of it. I don't know why they changed it from it wasn't Lebanon going all the way out here but they renamed it Fairwood. Okay, this is hard to see. Like I was Paul Sudak from Bethany. We're talking about airport stuff, and I mentioned, gee, I can't find those airport markers. I saw 30 years ago over on that side. He said, well, there's a whole bunch of them over in the northeast corner. I said, really? I didn't know that. So I, standing out here, I couldn't see him at all. I had to go in. I was, 6 feet from him, and then I saw it. I came back later. I put the orange markers, but they form a corner. They're starting here. It goes to the corner there, and then goes to here, and then they disappear after there. So just this little part was not touched for whatever reason. I had always seen that, the triangular top, I assumed that they had reflectors on it or some kind of electric lights, which they may have had as well. But Paul was telling me about this one is actually right in the corner. It's hard to see, but it's one that actually still has a board on it. And they were close enough. They almost formed like a really low fence. And they had boards. They'd be painted and be very visible from the air to mark the corner of the runway. And this picture here is obviously not Bethany. This is Arizona. And it's not connected. The posts are not connected by wood. They use corrugated metal. But that's the idea of it, is it would form, and I'm sure this was painted a bright color at one time, because now from overhead it looks kind of like the scrub brush. But that's what it would have looked like just with the painted boards. And interesting thing about them is on this side, there's the furthest left two flags there are not markers. There's a marker, and then there's a flag and a flag. There's the overturned tree, which I'm certain is from the 2018 tornado that came through here. And I was looking at it, and I said, that's a funny looking root. And I looked at it, it's metallic. It's a cable. So those other two flags mark a cable, which we think was part of an electrical system for electric lights on these. And you never would see it because it was buried below the ground. It's not visible at all there because it's below ground. Only reason you see it is because of the tree overturned, and you were able to see it. So this is something that requires further study, of course. But anyway, it was a cool piece of history that I wasn't aware of until I started doing this. I put the flags up for now. I'm going to go down and take them around later. But I'm not going to go in there because there's lots of briars and ticks and things like that. But if you want to, you can certainly explore it later if you so choose. And I talked about, because I'm just about to turn it over to Eric, the two other things I wanted to mention, because once we go into the woods, we'll do that. We'll see the other end of Lebanon. Behind the recycling center, there's the double set of walls, and that goes down and is perpendicular to another ancient highway, unnamed. That I think where's Bob?
Right here.
Oh, I think we're just going to walk a little part of that, right? And that's we think that it was north-south. It was laid out by New Haven Colony, probably in the mid 1700s, where they chopped the town up into. They just they were sitting down there on paper and just drawing lines, and said that we're gonna chop up the land, we'll make these plots, and we're gonna call these things highways in between. And sometimes they never got built because they didn't make sense. They were in a swamp, they were uphill, whatever. But in this particular case, it was. There's evidence of the double walls. It was a highway, but it's been gone. Like earliest maps are from 1852. That doesn't show up there, but it lines up with like the north-south part of Luke Hill Road. If you look at it on a map, it lines up directly with that ancient highway. And the final thing I'll just mention is after we do. Well, actually, we're not doing that loop by the old recycling, right?
We're just going to do a short loop because the rest of the trails are really wet. So we'll just do that one easier, drier route.
So I will just say, just west of where we're looking at the circle and south of the old recycling center where the east-west runway was, when I was a kid, there was a plane graveyard there. And there were fuselages there were wings, there were engines, various parts. That was in the 80s. I remember seeing it. Of course, I didn't take any pictures of it, not that I could find. And then, but I think it was by the 90s it was gone. I think Public Works cleaned it up or whatever. They're gone. They're not visible anymore. But it was kind of a cool um, feature of it was you know kind of like on farms. A lot of times you put the tractor out in the pasture and you leave it. When you're done with it, it was kind of the same thing, just with airplanes. That concludes my part of the talk. Is there any questions I can answer?